All right, everybody. I've got, thanks for joining the sales call today. I've got Todd Haigh on the line. Todd can give you a little bit more background, but I sent an email out to everybody. So Todd is a operating principal for Keller Williams here in the Twin Cities. Has two market centers under his wing, used to be four. And how many agents do you have, Todd, in your two market centers?
Right around 550.
550 agents, so pretty good pulse on our market, that's for sure. And been doing a long time. I've known Todd for 10, 12 years or so. We had lunch the other day, and Todd just has a lot of really good information, I thought, that he could share with us on the market, what he's seeing, what he's learning. One of the neat things about working with kind of an operating principal like Todd is at KW is they get a lot of information. And we in the mortgage side have to kind of go find that information or go to a seminar or read online, things like that. And I just thought Todd had a lot of good insight on where the housing market's been, what we're going to see here in the next 12, 24 months. And he can kind of go through it. So we had lunch. Maybe today, Todd, you could just share kind of some of the background information, what you've got and what you might know. So why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of what you're seeing in the forecast ahead for not only real estate, but mortgage.
Perfect. Yeah. So I tend to find myself in quite a few educational classes, information sessions, spend time listening to the chief economist for Keller Williams, NAR, follow Brian Buffini, and just pulling information from a lot of different sources. And like Brian said, we were talking at lunch the other day, and I was sharing some of the things that I had learned, and he just said, "Hey, could you jump on a call with me on Monday and just share what you know?" So the stuff that I'm going to go over, I'll try and reference where it came from. But to begin with, I am part of a group called FOR, and it's the Future of Real Estate, and we tend to bring in speakers. So we had an event back in October. We brought in Dr. Yoon, the chief economist for NAR. So I'm going to start out with some of the things that he was going over, and some of it is forecast information based on October. So some things have been updated, some things have changed since then. So just keep that in mind. So he felt that we were going to end up with about 4 million units sold for 2023. That's about where we landed. We were just, I believe, a tad over 4 million units sold. That's down from 6.1 million units in 2021. So pretty big drop. For us here locally, and I know we've got some people on from Rapid City, we pretty much saw about a 35% drop in the Twin Cities area. I was just going over some of this data with my teams last week, and that is right in line with how much we dropped during the Great Recession and how much we dropped in the early 80s when we were dealing with inflation as well. So Yoon believes that we'll see a 15% increase in business unit sales in 2024. Keep in mind that the way NAR reports is that every unit represents two sides. It represents a buyer and seller side. And I was actually just meeting with one of my administrators this morning, and we were going over our numbers, which was really interesting. So we did about 43% seller sides last year, and we did, and this out of 3,000 units, 43% seller sides, and then the rest was buyer side. So it's a little bit skewed as listings are down right now. So I asked Dr. Yoon at the event, I said, we had about 4 years where we were hovering right around 5.5 million units that were sold nationwide. And then we went up a little bit in 2020 during the pandemic, and then we topped out at 6.1 million. I said, would it be fair to say that the U.S. is sustainable at 5.5 million units, knowing that we were going to finish 2023 at 4 million units? He said, I would agree with that, except I think that we get back to 5.5 million units and then we grow from there because there's so much demand that is out there. So that was the answer to that question. And we have a long way to go because we did finish out at 4 million units just to simply get back to where we should be sustainable at 5.5 million units. And 15% bump in unit sales this year would be great because those unit sales are probably going to be coming with the highest average sales price that we've ever seen. So everything kind of depends on inflation right now. So he went into talking about inflation, and he said that housing is really the heavyweight. When you hear the CPI number, housing carries about 30 to 40% of that number. But he went into something that I'd never heard before. And he said the government uses government data, but there's actually private data as well. And what the Fed is after is they want to get to 2% inflation. And unfortunately, last month or this month, when we got last month's reading, a couple of weeks ago, we saw inflation go up. And the reason it went up is because consumer goods, what you buy at the grocery store, went up, and housing went up. And that's very frustrating when you hear this next stat. So he said, if you use government data, we're at about 3.7% for the CPI. But if we used private data, we would already be below 2% for the CPI. And what the government is using when it comes to, as it relates to housing, is that back in the 80s, they decided that they were going to come up with a way of putting a rental number on every single family house. Single family homes that are owner occupied, they put a rental number on that. Now, how can the government really put a rental number on every house? I would say that their data is probably flawed to begin with, but private data would include apartment buildings. And the government does not use apartment buildings as part of their data. But he said that it would catch up and that instead of being at 3.7%, that we would already be below 2%. Well, we know that the Fed's mandate really is to get that inflation number at a sustainable 2% or less. They would be fine with that. Also, part of their mandate is employment. And employment, as we all know, is doing really well. So as long as we start to see that CPI number come down, then we all know that the 10-year bond is going to come with that. And along with that, that spread between the 10-year bond and where the 30-year mortgage rates are at, that's going to compress as well. And really today, the 10-year bond this morning was at 4.1%. If we were at 2% instead of closer to 3%, it's a little less than 3% right now, as you all know, we'd already be at 6.1% for a 30-year interest rate. So after the CPI came out on the 12th, they always have a bunch of talking heads on CNBC. And one of the guys they always interview is from Vanderbilt University. And he said, be patient, that the underlying fundamentals of disinflation are there. It's just going to take a little bit more time. And he called it, we're in the last mile of that. And he said, it unfortunately might take a few more months before that happens, but in a few months, we're really going to start to see where that's going to take hold. And that goes right along with what Dr. Yoon was saying, is that private data is going to catch up with the public data. And the reason that the apartment rents are coming down now, he had talked about that they've overbuilt. And this always happens. You could go back through history and there's these time frames when developers get excited and they end up building more apartments and condos than what they really should. So on rates, Yoon is talking about this year that we're going to be in the 6 to 7% range all year. That'll be interesting to see, what really happens with that. Again, because we should probably be closer to 6.1%. But he had said that spread at 3%, that is not the ordinary spread, that only 4 times since 2000 have we had a 3% spread versus that 2% spread. That was 9/11, the Great Recession, COVID, and right now. So he said, he fully expects that that 3% spread is going to come down. I don't know if you've heard much about this. This was really good information. I hadn't heard anything about this next thing that I'm going to go over. He talked about NAR's lobbying efforts, and I don't know if all of you know this or not, but the National Association of Realtors is the biggest lobbyist. So they do have a big voice in what's happening. And what he said was they've got bipartisan support on raising the exemption on a sale of real estate, which is currently at $250 for a single person and $500,000 for a married couple. It's been 25 years since they've raised that exemption, and they know through the tax code that they can manipulate behavior, and they want to see more homes coming to the market, but a lot of people may not be motivated to really do that. So how could they increase their motivation? Well, that's one way of doing it. So Representative Jimmy Panetta out of California, where prices are very high and people bought homes all throughout the United States back in the 70s and 80s, that might be part of that baby boomer generation that really needs to do something but hasn't done anything because they don't want to get hit with a big tax bill on capital gains. So Panetta has proposed raising that exemption from the $250 for a single person to $400,000, and for a married couple from $500,000 to $900,000. And that's a big deal. I actually had a sale last year in Rogers that exceeded the $500,000 for a married couple, and that by the way, that $250 and $500,000 is every 2 years you can take that exemption. So they want to stay on that same course every 2 years. So Dr. Yoon was saying that they do have bipartisan support to raise that exemption, and hopefully that will help with the inventory issue. Another thing that they're working on that does not have as much momentum right now, that they're hoping they will pick up momentum in 2024, is that baby boomers own $18 trillion worth of real estate, and millennials own $5 trillion worth of real estate. And there needs to be a transfer of that real estate. A vast majority of rental property is owned by what he termed mom and pop, mom and pop investors, not hedge funds. We hear a lot about hedge funds going out, buying up properties. I just saw an interview with the CEO of Invitation Homes, big hedge fund company that has 100,000 rental units that they've acquired. And we felt some pressure on the real estate side from hedge funds being a competitor, but he's saying that a vast majority of rental properties are owned by mom and pop investors, and they're looking at doing a tax credit specifically if they were to sell one of their rental property holdings to a first-time home buyer to again alleviate some of that inventory pressure. It's said that we're probably 4 million housing units short of what we need in the United States right now. And the other problem too is that first-time home buyers typically have made up 40% of the market. Currently, they finished 2023 at 29%. That 11% is a very, very big gap. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that are coming from the buyer demand that may change that in the upcoming years. But we really need that. We need that inventory to be able to, have more sales, and obviously for all of you to, provide more mortgages. One of the things that Fannie and Freddie are looking to do, you probably heard a lot about some of the changes to the commissions that are being charged in real estate, and lawsuits that are going on out there, and that the buyers may be responsible for paying the buyer's agent the commission in the future. Fannie and Freddie are looking at the ability for buyers to finance that commission as part of their transaction. So we'll see what happens there. Here's some interesting stats. So this is where some of the pent up demand is coming from. So over the next 2 years, they anticipate that there will be 7 million new babies born, 3 million new marriages, 1.5 million divorces, 7 million people will turn 65. So, and that's just in 2 years. So every day, 10,000 baby boomers turn 65. And that'll happen all the way out through 2029. So in the next 2 years, we'll see 4 million deaths. There'll be 4 million new net jobs created. And all of this will obviously affect real estate or the need to either buy or sell. And the last one that Dr. Yoon talked about, and I had a hard time getting my head around this, is that there will be 50 million job switches in the next 2 years. So if all of that I just went over is supposed to happen in the next 2 years, just think how much of that has happened over the last 2 years, right? And so it's creating this pent up demand. So Buffini was just on, Brian Buffini. I don't know if any of you follow him or not. You can go to Facebook and just search Brian Buffini, and his page will come up. His 2024 bold predictions will come up as well. And he was on with Dr. Yoon. And some of the things that they talked about, I found really interesting as well. And one of them is that there is massive pent up seller demand. And when the rates come down, the sellers are going to come back out because they're in love with their rate, but they're not necessarily in love with their home. And you could just take that back to, some of those stats, again, 7 million babies being born. How many people are sitting in a home right now where they need more space because of that? Or 1.5 million divorces, right? They need to unload their house because of the divorce, or 4 million deaths. So again, there is, they believe, a lot of pent up seller demand, and that rate is really going to come into the equation here. We've probably all heard that household formations are really at their peak, but here's some additional information to that that Buffini and Yoon talked about, is that a household formation, which is somebody moving out of their parents' basement into a rental unit. Maybe they purchased, maybe they have a roommate, but they've created a new household. That typically happens on average at age 26. And then first-time home buyers on average are 33 to 34 years old. And if you were to look at a chart of births going back 33 or 34 years ago, you would see that for the foreseeable future, we're going to have peak 33 people that are turning 33 or 34 years old, again, for the foreseeable future, which again is going to come back to bumping up that first-time home buyer percentage from 29% and getting back on track and moving up through the 30-some% and back to 40-some%, which again will push everything up. It'll create more demand, which, by the way, typically everything's based on generational trends, and we're going to see the millennials move through their peak buying years. Peak buying years for a generation typically is that mid 40s in terms of age, and that's exactly where millennials are at. So by 2025, you'll start to see the first millennials get to that 44, 45-year-old age range, and then wave after wave, year after year, millennials moving through those peak buying years when they've moved up the job ranks, they've moved up the pay scales, they've been able to get a handle on their student loans, all of that stuff that all of you see when you're qualifying somebody for a mortgage, right? And so and that'll happen obviously at the same time too, that there's going to be huge pressure on baby boomers to downsize as they're turning 65, 70, 75 years old. And then obviously those deaths are occurring as they hit the upper 70s as well. So household formations are at their peak. But here's something that's interesting. What Yoon said during that interview was that pool of household formations, that 26 to 33, 34-year-old, has never been bigger. So again, that's going to spit out those 33 or 34-year-old first-time home buyers, but also inside that pool are a number of buyers as well that could be first-time home buyers. So I found that really interesting, and not only interesting, but encouraging as well. Brian, how much time do I have? I don't want to take up your whole call.
No, you're doing good. We usually go about a half hour, maybe sometimes a little over, especially if anybody has any questions. So you're doing great.
Okay, great. And two, hopefully I'm not boring anybody to death with all the stats, but we all want to have that crystal ball and what's going to happen. And again, I find this stuff interesting. So they also talked about the number of households that own their property free and clear. That percentage sits at 31%. I found that high, but also interesting. And the number of homeowners that have 50% or more equity is at 39%, which basically means 70% have 50% or more equity, right? And then when it comes back to interest rate, they're going to be less interest rate sensitive if they're one of the 3 million marriages, 1.5 million divorces, 7 million people that are turning 65. But as the rates start to come down and they really get into the fives, which could happen, that any, they're not worried as much about rate as somebody else might be that doesn't have as much equity to roll over. So that, not being rate sensitive could certainly bring more properties to the market, especially, when we see some of this other stuff like getting that exemption raised from 250,000 to 400,000 and 900,000. So interesting stuff. That is really kind of everything that I've got that I thought was a highlight. The biggest encouragement here, I think, is that we are going to see more activity, and the fact that we're going to see that we have the potential to see a 15% bump in units, especially when they're going to be at the highest average sales price that we've ever seen, is going to be great for the real estate industry. It's going to be great for the mortgage industry, be great for title industry as well.
No, I think that's a really good point for all of us to think about, like our forecast of, boy, how much more business could I pick up this year? That's 15% more units. But I think in the real estate world and mortgage world, like 30 to 40% of people gotten out of the business.
Right.
So take out, now you're only dealing with 60% competition and the units are going to go 15% up. So it's a really nice opportunity. I also look at what you said, Todd, as a huge advantage for us on the mortgage side. As we all know, there's three things that really get people qualified: credit, income, money or cash, down payment. Well, if they're sitting on 70% of people are sitting on 50% equity in their house, there's your assets. So that should work for those people having to sell a home. And unemployment's at an all-time low. So people have jobs. So income and assets are typically taken care of in that demographic. So hopefully it just paid the bills. That would help.
Exactly. Yeah. It certainly does not have the same feel from when we were coming out of the market cycle back in, we didn't really start to come out of the Great Recession on the real estate side until 2011, at least here locally, because the units bottomed out in 2010 and the volume bottomed out in 2011, and 2012 we started to take off again. Definitely less competition, in real estate, less competition in mortgages. But this time, people aren't coming out of this downturn with, bad credit, a short sale, on their credit, some of those things, a foreclosure. We just don't have that. The event that caused the downturn in sales and, obviously mortgage starts as well would be inflation. And that's what we really need to pay attention to. And I'm sure all of you have been. And let's watch, those releases. The next one is on February 13th for the January data. Let's just hope that in this long saga of high inflation that we see a number that begins with a 2 and not a 3.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
What questions? Somebody have a question for Todd? I mean, obviously Todd has got a lot of experience in the real estate world, 500 and some agents work on his teams. Pretty good expert of any question you might have about the real estate market. Come on, somebody's got a question. All right, Lori, I saw you took your thing off mute. What do you got?
Yeah, I sound horrible, but I can ask a question. What are some things that you talk to your agents about in seeking out with the mortgage person? I mean, is there certain criteria that you talk about when you give advice on that?
I think most what we're talking about right now, Lori, is like stay focused on the activities, and the activity, really, the job is lead generation. Go out and get your unfair share of what's available right now, and make sure that you've got a great team of professionals that are backing you up. So you've got that loan officer, you've got that title company, you've got that home inspector that are going to support your efforts so that they don't fall by the wayside. Make sure that you've got a team behind you, specifically on the mortgage side, that really understands any new programs that might be coming out, any changes, or anything that's going to really help get somebody qualified. And I think right now, really understanding that first-time home buyer well into the future is going to be very, very important, because there is going to be a wave, I think, like we've never seen before, of first-time home buyers and getting them qualified. So if that's down payment assistance, credit repair, anything like that could lead to getting more people qualified, that's going to be a huge plus.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Todd. It's been really good info. This is just kind of a personal question I've had, and since you're local. So the new rail system we have that they've been working on for years is going all the way up to St. Cloud. And I'm wondering if we're going to see like a lot of, if you think we're going to see new builds, affordable housing following up that area, or do you think that'll have any impact on like local real estate?
So I've been following North Star Rail for a while, just because I've lived in the northwest suburbs, and Rogers, Maple Grove and Otsego, and have kept an eye on it. And when you add rail, it's like laying down a new freeway, basically, or at least an additional lane to the freeway. There certainly has been growth along that North Star rail line. However, I don't think that they've met the forecasts that they were hoping for with that. The fact that it goes out, would be extended out to St. Cloud, that could certainly help central Minnesota, and again, could help anywhere along that rail line. And then two, with COVID changing everything, and Minneapolis, certainly not at its occupancy levels as far as those buildings go downtown, that could change everything as well. So, I don't know that I would trust any forecasts that are coming out about rail at this point. Just my opinion on it.
Cool, thanks.
Todd, what would you say is the kind of the sentiment of your agents going into the year? People excited? Is it, oh, I'm just drained, this is tough? I don't know if I can. What's mainly the sentiment of people right now?
Yeah, I don't want to make everything sound rosy, because I do know that we've seen some agents exit the business. They're just tired with it, that it didn't meet their expectations. They didn't understand that their job was lead generation, and that it all begins with an appointment, and that's something that we can control. But they didn't go out and do what was necessary. But I'll tell you, the people that are in the office, the people that I talk to, and I mean, we'll just in Maple Grove alone, for our Tuesday team meeting, we'll draw 70 people into our training center. We'll have another 30 or 40 online. We're hearing a lot of positive comments about what they've got going on. Specifically, how many market analysis they've gone out and have done for somebody that has raised their hand and said, look, I'm thinking about doing something in the near future. And that's what we need, because on the real estate side, if we're going to hit our goals, it all means that we need to hit our listing goals, because if we don't list them, we can't sell them. And that has been the biggest problem. We know that if we had more inventory, we certainly would be selling more homes. So, it's encouraging to hear that our agents are meeting with more prospective sellers. But same thing on the buyer side, that, hey, I've got buyers, but there's just nothing out there for me, and this is the time of year too, when we start to see that inventory really ramp up. The low point for inventory is basically the first week of January. And from there, it builds all the way through the third week of May typically. And then it just stays pretty constant through the summer months. And then the third week of September, you'll start to see that inventory decline. Now that's Minnesota. I would say for you folks out in Rapid City, that is very similar. One of my buddies owns the Keller Williams out there, and him and I talk all the time. And so I know that, seasonality is very similar in the two markets. But at this point, I don't think that we came out of the gate with a boom by any means. And this, by the way, goes back, and I didn't share that. It was one of the things that Buffini said. He said he believed that we would get an okay start to the year, and that by the end of the second quarter, we would really feel things ramping up, as rates will have come down sufficiently by that point. The third quarter and the fourth quarter of 2024 are going to be strong. And he said the spring market of 2025 is going to be off the hook. It's going to be one of the wildest and craziest markets that we've ever seen.
Well, I think that's let's leave it with that. That's a good thing. No, that's really that's good intel, and it also just shows us that we got to lay the groundwork now. And it's funny how you say you talk to your agents, and the ones that are doing the prospecting and following up on leads and putting in the efforts are actually the ones doing the most work. And I think that's probably true for the last century.
Exactly.
And it's just that we all got to do that. So, all right, Todd, I really appreciate it. We're right about 1:30. The information you provide, and every time I talk to you, is great information. So we appreciate you just sharing and being a leader in our market and helping us educate on the housing market. So appreciate your time. And as you know, if you need anything from us, let us know.
You bet. Have a great spring, everyone.
All right. Thanks a lot, Todd.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.